André Comte-Sponville is one of those philosophers who speaks clearly, directly, with sincerity, and never hides behind words. He's a thinker who loves simplicity, but that doesn't mean he sacrifices depth. In fact, it's precisely in the clarity with which he tackles the most complicated questions that his strength stands out. He was born in Paris on March 12, 1952, into a family marked by emotional tension. He has described his mother as deeply affectionate but a little crazy, with pathological and alcohol problems, and his father as very strict, rough, and scornful, more unhappy than cruel. Two fragile figures, but in opposite ways. He recalls that as a child, he simply couldn't be happy because, as he put it, a child who loves cannot be happy if his mother is unhappy. The family environment was unstable, and for a long time he carried the weight of that suffering inside him, as a difficult inheritance to untangle. But over time, he learned not to remain its prisoner. This became a central idea in his philosophy: the importance of not being crushed by the past because one can choose to break free from it. As he himself says, "I believe in freedom, not in free will, but in the possibility of freeing oneself." We are not determined by what has happened to us. We can transform our story even without believing in absolute free will. He doesn't think human beings are completely free, nor that wanting to change is enough. But he does believe there is always the possibility of liberation, and he has experienced it firsthand. For him, adolescence was an escape from the prison of childhood. Discovering the world, relationships, love, desire, these things made him feel alive. It was like stepping out of a dark tunnel. He vividly recalls the moment when, after leaving an all-boys elementary school, he entered middle school and discovered the existence of girls. He describes it this way: a dazzling revelation from which, truth be told, I have never recovered. But the real liberation came when he began to think for himself. Philosophy became, for him, a tool of inner emancipation long before it was a career. Reading, reflecting, understanding. These were the first acts of a young man trying to become something more than what he had inherited. He attended the École Normale Supérieure and earned the agrégation, the French equivalent of a degree with full teaching credentials, and from there began his academic career. For 24 years, he taught philosophy, first in high schools, then in teacher training schools, and finally at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. But at a certain point in 1998, he left his university career behind. He wanted to write, speak, and bring philosophy outside academic circles, into real life, among everyday people, in the midst of daily questions. And that's exactly what he did. He wrote books that were both simple and profound, published articles regularly, took part in public debates, and spoke out on social, moral, and political issues. He's a man who has lived through suffering, chosen lucidity, and now seeks to share tools for thinking and liberation with anyone willing to listen. He became known to the general public for his books, which address with disarming clarity topics like happiness, spirituality without religion, ethics, death, and love. Among his best-known works are A Small Treatise on the Great Virtues, The Taste for Life, and The Spirit of Atheism. He has written many other books, tackling subjects that range from ethics to secular spirituality, from love to death, always with the goal of making philosophy a concrete tool for living better. Although he was a committed communist for 10 years, today he describes himself as a left-wing liberal. He is active in the French public debate and writes weekly for the magazine Challenges. He has been married twice. The first time was at 30 to a woman from whom he later separated. For more than 30 years, he has shared his life with another partner, whom he decided to marry only recently, at the age of 72. He has 3 children and has generally kept his family life private. He believes in love, in relationships, in the concrete reality of human bonds. But what makes him truly fascinating, now more than ever, is his way of dismantling one of the most deeply ingrained questions in human culture. What is the meaning of life? Not only does he consider it a bad question, he calls it quite bluntly, a badly framed question. He even cites Freud, who in his view captured the point perfectly. When you are searching for the meaning of life, it's because you're already sick. Which means that someone who is well, someone who is living fully, doesn't need to ask what life means. They're already living it. It's only when something breaks, when we feel empty or lost, that the question about meaning arises. Comte-Sponville doesn't deny that it's an important question, but he's very clear. It's a poorly framed one, and he explains why in detail. The problem is that the word meaning actually has at least 3 different definitions, and that creates confusion. It can mean sensation, significance, or direction. But these are not at all the same thing. Asking what is the meaning of life can mean, what's its significance? Where is it going? What do I feel? But those are different questions, and we bundle them together as if they were one. That's why, in his view, the apparent depth of the question hides nothing more than a big conceptual mess. The notion of meaning is confused, and because it's confused, people think it's deep, but no, it's just confused. So what's his perspective? He says life has no meaning, but it can have value. Value comes from only one thing: love for life itself. Life is worth living if we love it. According to Comte-Sponville, the problem isn't that life needs to mean something. The problem is that we insist on giving it meaning, as if it couldn't be enough on its own. In reality, he says, life is meant to be lived, not interpreted. It's not something to be understood, but inhabited, felt, loved. And the most natural way to do that is to want to live it. Here he introduces a key concept from Spinoza's philosophy, conatus, the natural drive that pushes every living being to continue existing, to persist in its being, to not die. It's what makes us get up in the morning, breathe, move, look for something, without even thinking about it. It's a vital force. In other words, it's the desire to live. We all have it within us, even when we don't realize it. Comte-Sponville sums it up by quoting physician Xavier Bichat. Life is the set of functions that resist death. And then he adds, to live is to want to live more. He also takes from Spinoza another fundamental idea that flips common sense on its head. We don't desire things because they're good. They're good because we desire them. And that applies especially to life. We don't love life because it has meaning. He says it's by loving life that it becomes good for us. In other words, life doesn't need to mean anything to be fully lived. There's no meaning to search for in the heavens or in sacred books. There's a life to inhabit, day after day. And if we manage to love it, even without answers, even in confusion, even in suffering, then everything gains value. For him, simply, living can be enough. In this sense, love is the real philosophical question, not meaning. Not love as idealization, but as the force that keeps us alive, that makes us choose, act, endure. And it's precisely in this space, between love for life and the absence of any objective meaning, that his view on religion takes shape. For him, religion is one of the answers humanity has invented to fill the void of meaning. A powerful, ancient, often comforting answer. But he says it's not the only one. And above all, it's no longer necessary. We can live well without it. In fact, perhaps only without it can we begin to live fully free. Comte-Sponville is an atheist, but not a nihilist. He doesn't believe in God, but he recognizes the value of a spirituality that doesn't need heaven to be authentic. He says, "I am an atheist, but I am faithful," meaning that you can live without God, but not without fidelity. Fidelity to love, to beauty, to life. Fidelity to what matters, even if it isn't eternal. In his book, The Spirit of Atheism, he explains that what we call sacred doesn't belong to another world. It can be found in the intensity of human experience, in deep love, in the contemplation of a landscape, in the silence of a clear thought. You don't need to believe in God to live spiritual moments. Spirituality doesn't require faith or an afterlife. It only requires presence. And here he circles back to his central idea: living is already enough. There's no need to search for more. Whoever looks for some hidden, transcendent meaning risks missing what's right in front of them. His message might seem unsettling, but it's deeply human. He says that life has no meaning, but it can have value. And that value comes from us, not from outside, from the choices we make, from the relationships we live, from the love we feel. No external salvation, no promises, just the courage to inhabit this life now. And if there's one way to sum it all up, perhaps it's in his own words. Don't look for the meaning of life. Look instead for reasons to love it. So if the meaning of life is the wrong question, what should we be asking instead?